you're not going to see any pictures. You're going to see description of the cranial bones and facial bones, or any bones. You're going to see a description. For the lab on Friday, the lab's Friday test, you will see a picture. All right? And remember, on the lab, you need to know not the features. You need to know the overall name and how many. So that's what you need to know, be aware of. Don't forget that this Friday will also, in the afternoon at 1. You take the lab test. Before you take it, you need to turn in your binder. Again, you can turn in the binders in the afternoon. If you have other materials in there in the binder, I will not be able to give it to you back on that day. Most probably it'll be until next week. All right? So if you need something, make sure you don't have it. But I'll try to give it back to you. So that way it could help you. For sure by Monday it should have them ready. Okay? But I'll try to do some on Friday. If you have it ready, turn it in. That way I could, give it to you by Friday. Or on Friday morning, you could also turn it in. But anyway, so as we look at the cranial and the facial bones, you need to know the ones that are articulating with the sphenoid, the ones that have sinus of the cranial bones. So which ones have sinus? Yeah, the frontal, the sphenoid, the ethmoid. Those were the main 3 that had sinuses, not the rest. So as we look at the cranial bones, you need to know the sutures. Even though I didn't give you a description for the parietal bones, I could describe its location. It forms this sagittal suture, lateral sides of the skull. Which bone is it? The parietal. Anyway, so you should know the sutures, right? So what's the suture right here? The parietal to the occipital. Lambdoid. So you have that one. How about let's look at the side now. So the parietal to the temporal, and occipital to the temporal. That area right there. Now, nobody got that one? I should have put that one on the test. I will put it on the test then.
Occipital to what?
Right, the suture right there, occipital to the temporal. No?
It starts with X.
Nope. That was with an M. All right, so anyways, so let's look at some of the features. Let's look at some of the features here that we look on the cranium. So that reflects this area right here of the first one. So the first ones that we saw with the cranial were the occipital and the parietal. So the occipital, remember that I'm going to be explaining to you or describing the bone for a lecture on Wednesday, next Wednesday. It has a foramen magnum, hypoglossal canal, makes part of the skull that's the most posterior. Which bone is it? So we're using descriptive words for the occipital. This bones, I'm only going to have room to use 2 of the cranial bones. All right? So I will not be able to have all 8 out there on a station. So I only have room for 2 of them. Remember, I'm trying to put to use the 26 bones. I cannot use all of them. So I'm telling you right now that from the cranium, you will see 2 bones, at least close to 2 bones on that. So it may be or may not be one of these. The point is that the features is what I'm going to be explaining to you as we're going over this, again, description of the occipital. For the parietal, as I mentioned, I did not give you a description, but you should already know the locations, such as it's the lateral sides of the skull. It forms the sagittal suture. See that? It's referring to the parietal bone. Do these have sinuses? No. All right? So any questions on the features for describing the bone? That's what you're going to see per lecture, not per lab. For lab, you're going to have the actual bone. Okay? We'll give you the actual bone. Moving on then to the frontal. Does this one have a sinus? Yeah. And what was the feature for this one? The supraorbital margin. Again, that was this ridge right here. And remember, it does have sinus. This actually forms the anterior bone of the cranium, of the cranial bones. And it does have a sinus. So that's the feature for that, forming the anterior part. It actually provides the coronal suture as it associates with the parietal. See, what bone is it? You could use the sutures to describe this bone also as well. On the temporal, does this one have a sinus? And what were the features of this one? No sinuses, only on the frontal. Okay, the mastoid, all the process, mastoid process, stylo process, and then of course you have the cytomatic process of the temporal bone. So when you look at the temporal bone, remember that you do have also this indentation right there, that fossa, mandibular fossa. The condylar process of the mandible will coincide with this area. And of course, the stylo process, remember this was very important because it basically how the ligament will extend down to the higher bone. So those were very important features right here for the temporal. Again, no sinuses. Any questions there so far? The next one is important. Why is this one important? There you go, the celaturcica, very important. Remember, this is the brace of the cranial bones and the brace for the facial bones. It does provide support for the facial and cranial bones. So very important. The celaturcica, as it's already been mentioned, it houses the pituitary gland. If you want to see that a little bit better, you need to go to chapter 16. So you can see that, because none of the pictures that we have in this chapter illustrates that point. But the celaturcica is a very important feature on it, and you should know that it houses the pituitary. And then we have the greater wings, the pterygoid process, as well as the plates where it anchors to the floor of the skull. Okay? Anyway, so again, a very important bone. It's only one bone. Remember that on the sides of the skull, you only see the greater wings. You don't see that. And then, of course, through the eye sockets, you can actually see this. It does have sinus. Any questions on that? All right, the next one is the ethmoid. The ethmoid is associated with what? Sense. Olfactory. So remember that right here we have the crystal galley. What was the membrane that attaches to that area? It's part of the dura mater, but it's not. It's more specific. It's part of the dura mater, you're correct, but it's a specific name, and the word is F-A-L-X, falx cerebri. So that's what falls in there. Falx cerebri is the answer. So that membrane is part of the dura mater. Yes. So that falx cerebri binds to that area, the crystal galley. So it's F-A-L-X, falx cerebri. And remember, this one does have sinus. What's the other important feature of the ethmoid besides the crystal galley? The perpendicular plate. So the perpendicular plate is what? Perpendicular plate.
Nasal septum.
Right. Which part of the nasal septum?
Middle.
Upper and middle. That's right. The lower is the vomer, the inferior part. So this is forming the majority of the nasal septum, the superior and middle part, not the inferior. Okay? So it does have sinuses. Again, you need to know that feature, crystal galley, and the membrane that attaches. That was a reading assignment for you to know. I already gave you the answer. Questions on the sphenoid and the ethmoid? Yes?
Can you please go over the sphenoid features that...
Once again, crystal galley, greater wing, and you have the pterygoid process and the pterygoid plate.
There's a crystal galley on the sphenoid? Yeah.
Crystal galley? No, I'm sorry, celaturcica. No, crystal galley is on the ethmoid. Celaturcica, greater wing, these sticks right here, process, pterygoid process, and the plate. This is the crystal galley on the ethmoid. All right, don't forget the sphenoid, you've got to know all the bones. You cannot just say all the cranial bones. You're not going to get no points. You've got to write them out. Okay? All right, so as we look at the facial bones, the ones that do not associate with the sphenoid are the nasal bone, the inferior, the lacrimal bone, and of course the hyoid. So that's an exclusion because this one is already farther away. It's not a facial bone, but it's associated here. The hyoid bone is already away. Nasal, inferior, lacrimal, and the hyoid. They're not going to be associated with the sphenoid. Out of all these, which one has a sinus?
The lacrimal.
No. Sinuses. Only the maxillary. That's right. Only this one. It's only that one. Everything else doesn't have any. So once again, the ones that do not touch the sphenoid, nasal, inferior, nasal pocket, lacrimal, of course the hyoid. That's already a given because that's no bone touches that one. Remember, that's the horseshoe bone, jointless bone, also known. All right, so as we look at the maxillary bone, remember this forms the majority of the hard palate. Okay, it does have a sinus. And the borderline between the hard palate and the soft palate is what bone?
I'm sorry?
The palatine bone. Remember, it's the L-shaped bone. So this forms the borderline between the hard and soft palate. The palatine bone. All right. So this is also described as the L-shaped bone. How many palatine bones do you have? Two. Two bones. How many maxillary? Two. All right, so you need to know the name and number for for Friday's lab test. Okay? If you're not going to be here on Friday, you need to be here at 1 so you can take it today, the lab test. Because my other class is taking it today. All right, so please do not be absent on Friday, especially the afternoon. All right, so the nasal bones, how many of those? 2 also. The nasal bones is only 2. Again, this forms the bridge of your nose, the hard part. Okay? And we already mentioned the palatine bone, that's the borderline. All right, the vomer. Remember that the vomer is right at the nasal opening, but it's the inferior portion that it's making. The vomer. And then we have been looking at the zygomatic bone because of this temporal process. When we look at this picture, let's go back to the picture. And let's emphasize this picture. Right, picture right there. Again, that zygomatic bone right here has a temporal process. So it's the temporal process of the zygomatic. And this one over here is the zygomatic process of the temporal. Both of them together, what do they form? Zygomatic arch. Again, this is a nice picture. You'll see this picture in your lab test on Friday. Okay, you need to know these points. Okay. So that's the arch, zygomatic arch, that is making that temporal process, okay, of the zygomatic bone. And then the lacrimal bone, remember these are the smallest, so that would be the description for that one, the smallest of the facial bones. So these are found within the orbits of the eye socket. You can see here very close to it, medial to it. All right, and that's going to be draining the tears. The inferior nasal septum is the vomer, that inferior part. See that? That's part of the nasal septum. All right, then of course the only bone that is movable of the facial bones is which one? Which one? Right, the mandible. What are the features on the mandible that we need to know? As you can see, I'm getting prepared for the test. So what are the features? All right, so we have the chin. What's the name of the chin?
Mental protuberance.
Mental protuberance. The little hole?
Mental forehead.
Okay. And then, of course, we have the ramus, the cheek area, and then, of course, the condylar process with that head right there. See that? So again, this is the mandible, the only movable bone of the face. So those are the features you got to know. One, mental protuberance, mental foramen or foramen, the ramus, condylar process. Remember, does this one articulate with the sphenoid? And the answer is yes, it does. At this area, the head. Through ligament, it does touch. Has a connection with the sphenoid. Again, we have no pictures in our textbook. This was basically from another outside resource where you could actually see that. Okay. All right, and then of course the only jointless bone is the hyoid. How is it suspended like a swing in its specific location of the body? How is it able to do that? Because it has the styloid hyoid ligament. So remember, that comes from the skull, from the temporal bone, styloid process. And where is it going to connect, that ligament, styloid hyoid ligament? Where is it going to connect? If it's not the greater, that's right, it's the lesser horn. It attaches to this one, the lesser horn. The greater horn is for the pharynx, the larynx, the tongue muscles, all that. Yeah. So remember that the hyoid bone is going to provide support for the Adam's apple, the beginning of your larynx there. You see the connection of all that cartilage provides support. But at this point, the lesser horn serves for attachment of the styloid hyoid ligament. That's the point you need to remember. Any questions there? Remember, it's the jointless bone. Again, as we look at the sinus, you can see here the inferior nasal concave does not touch the sphena. So that's why we're saying inferior nasal concave does not. Superior and middle nasal concave are the equal. We do articulate. Okay. All right, so how many bones have sinuses? 4 bones. 3 from the cranium and 1 from the facial. All right, so let's go into the cranial skull. How many bones in a fetus? That's right, so don't forget that number. All right, so if you looked it up, that was the answer. So that's what they're describing to you. And you should know that. So there is a lot more bones. Okay. So the fontanelles, again, we have the sphenoidal fontanelle. You have also the very obvious anterior fontanelle. And then, of course, laterally, you also have the mastoid fontanelle. So this, what are the point of the fontanelles? That's right, so that it could pass through the first canal, point number 1. Point number 2, the brain to continue to grow. When are you going to have these fuse? When are you going to have the sutures? What age? 2. It's on your topic guide. By age 2, that's when they're going to fuse. All right? When is the brain going to stop growing? The cerebrium, to be exact, left and right cerebrium. When is it going to stop growing? By age 5. But your brain, the limbic system doesn't stop growing, right? It's still growing right now. But we're talking about stopping the growth of the left and right cerebrium will be by age 5. All right, so that brings us up to the vertebrae. So in the vertebrae, what's a good way to learn them? What was the... That's right, breakfast, lunch, dinner, remember? There was also something else that our author was telling us. What do the cervical vertebrae look like? What do the thoracic vertebrae look like? And what about the lumbar? Again, that is in the reading. A lot of you, hopefully you have the textbook to help you out, all right? And that's another hint that she gave us. So for the thoracic, those are the only ones that I remember. And the lumbar. This one looks like a giraffe. That one looks like a moose. That's what this description is. Again, we'll be looking at more of her clues. It does kind of help out to some extent. Okay. Anyway, so let's begin with the curves. So the first one is the cervical. What type of curve is it? Like that. Concave. Thoracic. Convex, lumbar. You can repeat them again. Concave, and then sacrum. Convex. Again, you got to remember this. This is the #1 missed question on the test, on the lecture test. Primary curves, which are they? Thoracic and sacral. Secondary curves are lumbar and cervical. We talked about these curves being essential for raising your head, for sitting up, as well as now standing. Okay? So you should be familiar with this slide. Make sure you mark it. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. Maybe it looks like a moose. Yeah, maybe this one looks like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the ones that you have here of the problems with the curvatures: exaggerated thoracic, exaggerated convex thoracic is kyphosis. Exaggerated lateral thoracic, scoliosis. And then of course lordosis is convex, not concave. See, that's convex. So those are problems there with the back. Okay? Exaggerated thoracic, convex, lateral thoracic, exaggerated lateral, scoliosis. Okay? All right, so that, let's go into the vertebrae. I don't remember what this one they say that it looks like. I don't know. But we're an author, and I don't have one. So the point here is that what is the feature that we said about this one, this vertebrae? Yeah, these little holes on the side of the vertebral body. You should know that. If it has holes on the side of the vertebral body, see the lateral sides, that most likely is a cervical vertebrae. So if you see a vertebrae like that, I'm going to ask you, give me the name. I'm asking you, give me the name of that vertebrae. What are you going to say? Cervical vertebrae. You could also say vertebrae. It's a vertebrae, right? And what are the total number of vertebrae of this type that you have? 7. Remember, breakfast. Okay? 7. And remember, that transverse foramina is very typical. I don't know what the author said about this one, but anyways. Something unique about the cervical vertebrae is the atlas and axis. You gotta know these by the specific name, not just cervical, not just C1 or C2. The name is atlas, and the first one is the atlas C1. It has that obvious the vertebral arch. This arch is the only one that is very obvious on this type of vertebrae. And the axis, what is unique about it? The little dents, right? The little camel's hump, right? That dents. What type of joint is this? According to chapter 8 or exercise 11. It's a pivot joint. That was part of your question number 5 of exercise 11. Review question number 5 that I assigned for you. Remember, I took out number 10 for 5. Okay? Anyways, so that is the important one, the pivot that we learned. The thoracic, remember something of the features that we saw on this one? What were they? The heart-shaped vertebrae. And our author is saying that this one looks like the head of a giraffe when you look at it from the front. See, it has the long face, and then the ears on the sides. See that? And then the little antlers. See? Yeah, I can see that. See that? Do you guys catch that on the reading? Okay, remember, reading the book gives you a little bit more tips. All right, and then that long spinous process, again, is that base of the giraffe. Yeah, these will be the ears. So what's unique about this is the facets also that are associated there. Okay, the facets. Again, you should be able to identify the vertebrae such as their name. So what would be the name of this bone? What would be the name? Yeah, thoracic vertebrae, or just vertebrae. It's a vertebrae. What region? Then that would be the thoracic region. How many? 12, just like 12 ribs. Okay, lunchtime. All right. As we look at the lumbar, this is the one that our author is saying it is basically not so much from the front, but it's from the side that it looks like a moose. See that? This is the face of the moose, and this is the beard of it. You see that? I don't know if you've ever seen a moose. No. Okay. Go hunting. No, the point is, that's what she's saying. It kind of resembles that. Okay. There's good pictures in our textbook that we can see them. Anyway, so remember that this is the most massive. How are you going to know it's a lumbar vertebrae? Vertebral body. You can also look at the spinous process. It's blunt. And remember, this is the only one that has this sheet of bone, this lamina. See that? That produces these processes on the sides. See that? Okay? Again, it has a face like a moose. All right, then we moved into the sacrum. Remember the sacrum, we could use it for male or female. When do these fuse? When do they ossify? Yeah, in your 20s. And our author said between 25 or 30. See that? So it's basically as a young adult. Before the age of 30, you're going to have these fuse. What about the coccyx? When is that going to happen? Yeah, by age 25 for sure. Around there. I was saying 26, but 25. I don't know what she's saying 25. I usually see the number as 26. Anyways, so young adult again. And remember that this sacral curve, you're going to be able to distinguish gender, right? So the gender for the male, how are you going to see this curve? Yeah, it's going to cut more versus the female. Okay, so this is another way of to see that. And then of course we jump into the thoracic or the rib cage. What are the ribs that will associate to the sternum through cartilage? What are they called? Or true ribs or vertebral sternal ribs. Vertebral sternal ribs. So what are the ribs that connect to that area of the sternum? 1 through 7. The ribs that connect to this area are ribs 1 through 7. Through cartilage, but they connect to this area. What about the ribs that are in the location of ribs 8, 9, and 10? What are those called? Not falls, right? Vertebral chondral ribs. Because they're going to connect to rib number 7 through cartilage. So what are the rib numbers that connect to rib number 7 through cartilage? 8, 9, and 10. Called vertebral chondral ribs. You got to know that. Okay, make sure you know that for your lab test. You're going to see that. All right, inferior to the body of the sternum. What do you call this area? Side process. On top, the manubrium. Okay, you got to know those areas. So that basically is the result of the axial skeleton. Any questions? So that was basically these 80 bones that are associated through this area of the axial skeleton. Remember, you're not going to have all the bones on the test. I need to cut it down.
So are you going to have only 2 bones for the cranium or for the entire head?
No, only on the cranium. On the facial bones, I may not have none. I don't know. We'll see. All right. So the main thing I want you to know is the girdles. What's the importance of the girdles as we learned from chapter 8? Talking about movement. The girdles are no movement, uniaxial, biaxial, multiaxial. What are they? Multi. Remember that you have the highest range of motion. That's why the pectoral and the pelvic girdle are important for us to understand. You got to know the bones that make up the girdle. So what are the bones that make up the pectoral? The clavicle and the scapula. That's it. What about the pelvic girdle? What are the bones that make up that? Deoxycoxae, ilium, ischium, pubis. See, you get 4 points. See that? Only that side, not the femur at all. Okay? So when we look at the first one, once again, you're looking at 126 bones. I will not be able to, give you all these bones, but for sure you'll see the clavicle on the test, the scapula on the lab test, the humerus, no, maybe not, I don't know. Radius and ulna, yes. All right. Carpal bones, no. Metacarpals, no. Phalanges, no. Deoxycoxae, yeah. Femur, no. Patella, no. Tibia and fibula, yes. See that? Tarsal bones, well, I'm going to show them as a group, maybe. See that? You should know the big toe. All right? So, again, those are some points that you should be able to get through. So, again, in the lecture, describing this bone, how would I describe it to you? The S-shaped bone. All right? Again, you're going to have this on your lab test for sure. But again, the lecture test, I'm going to be describing the bone, S-shaped bone. Don't forget that you have a sternal end, a blunt end, and a flat end, the acromial end. The acromial end is going to face towards the scapula. Okay? The acromial process there of the scapula. It's going to associate with it. All right? Don't forget on the clavicle how to distinguish if it's, again, left and right. You got to understand what's the top of the bone so that you can orientate it correctly. Don't forget the blunt end goes to the midline. This is going to go to the outside, to the lateral. All right? So that's the right side, because that's the top of the bone. Again, if you put it just to the sternum, to the midline, this is incorrect. Okay? And remember that it's convex, it's out, not concave. This region right here should be facing out, away from your body. All right, for the scapula, remember we have these two processes, plus what's the other one that we had? Well, you had two other features. The glenoid cavity and the spine. Don't forget, the acromion process, the coracoid process, the acromion articulates with the clavicle, and the coracoid process is going to basically provide support for tendons that are going to link to the humerus. The glenoid cavity, that's where the humeral head will be linking up to that region. All right, so on the humerus, what are the features that you got to know? Greater and lesser tubercle. And inferiorly, you've got the olecranon fossa. See that? If I want to describe the radial, again, the ulnar connection, it'll be this bone will articulate at the trochlea. See that? The trochlea, that's the ulna. That's going to go there. The capitulum, that's for the radius. It's going to articulate at the condyle region of the capitulum of the humerus. That's the radius. Don't forget, this is how you're going to know the back of the bone versus the front, the anterior, the olecranon fossa. When we look at the ulnar radius, the descriptive words that I'm going to use for the ulnar are trochlear notch and the olecranon. Those are specific features. I'm not going to be able to use the ulnar head as a feature. And it's another one you got to know, but I'm not going to be able to use that one because it gives you out the name right away. So again, trochlear notch, olecranon. Okay. For the radius, basically no features there. Radial tuberosity, can't use it. Radial heads, can't use it. Styloid process of the radius, you can't use it. But it articulates at the capitulum of the humerus. I could use that, but I won't. That's the radius. So again, you got to know the features at least for the radius. Remember, you should be able to distinguish left and right as we were able to identify that in lab. Okay. All right, for the wrist, I'm not going to ask you to individually learn each of the names. What should you know? How they're arranged. So how do you have them arranged? In rows, 2 rows. All right? The only carpal bone that you need to know was that saddle joint. For the saddle joint, you need to know that carpal bone. Which one am I talking about? What is a saddle joint? Where do you have it? In your thumb. Trapezium to metacarpal number 1. See, that's the only one you gotta know. The carpal bones. Because that's where we used it. Alright? So anyways, so that is again the short bones, and then these connect to the palm of the hand, metacarpals to the phalanges. Remember the pollex, or the thumb, in this case the pollex, that's the correct term, only has 2 phalanx. So I could give you a hand, but without the fingers. Would you be able to tell if it's left or right?
Yeah.
Should. You should be able to tell that these are carpal bones, not tarsal bones, because they're going to be arranged in rows. You should be able to see that, right? So I could give you the whole diagram. I'm talking about lab. Just a piece of the hand or a piece of the foot. You should be able to know what it is. All right? Because I'm going to ask you, what is it? What part of the body is it from? Not what's the name of the bones. Okay? Is there a hand or foot? So again, you should be familiar with that. As we look at the lower extremities, remember that the ox coxae is part of the pelvis. And the pelvis is, when you say pelvis, is the entire structure, both left and right ox coxae. When you say hip bone, you can only, that's the common name for only one side. So one side of the hip bone is the ox coxae. So what is the name of the line? No, the arcuate line. That's what our author is using. I'll accept that. That's classical name. Or iliopectineal line. Remember, that's the one that everybody's using now. But she's using the arcuate line or iliopectineal line. So this line is important because it divides what? What's the bottom? The true pelvis. The top, all pelvis. Remember, on the ox coxae, you need to know that the ischium and the pubis form this structure, this opening on the ox coxae. What structure is that? That the ischium and pubis form. Yeah. Viturator. See that? Foramen. See that right there? That's the hole that they're forming. Acetabulum. So this one has a foramen, a viturator foramen, and acetabulum. Which bone is it? So those are the descriptive words I'm going to use in the lecture test. Describing the bone. So you got to know that. Acetabulum, what was the other one? Ischial spine, ischial tuberosity, arcuate line. Okay, those are the descriptive words for the ox coxae, the hip bone. Okay, I'm not going to give you no points for hip bone, all right? You got to say ox coxae. All right, so the largest was the ilium, and remember the ischium, that's also known as the sit-down bone. What part is the one receiving all the weight? Tuberosity. Yeah. The most anterior of the 3 bones, the pubis. Remember, the pubis is going to connect to the other ox coxis pubis through cartilage. Pubis symphysis. All right. So we also looked at gender, again, with the pubic arch. See that? So remember that this is not the only area that you need to be looking at in the skeletons, the groin area. So you don't need to be looking at this groin area all the time. You can look at other areas. You got to be familiar with our skeletons. Even the one in the back over here. Is that a male or female? Or the full skeleton up here, male or female? You got to know the difference. We don't have any other one. Okay, but anyways, you should know if they're male or female. So it's not just this. All right. Remember, you could only use this area once, and then you got to pick another area. So you can use the pubic arch and the sacrum. That's the way to distinguish it. Because those are 2 different areas.
We have to distinguish gender a couple of times on the example.
Especially for the appendiculars. This is all the appendicular you should know. All right? You should know that ability. Okay? And also left and right. Since it's the appendicular, you should also know if it's left or right as well. All right, with the femur, most likely you're not going to see this in your lab test, but in lecture I will describe it. It has a greater trochanter and lesser trochanter. See that? It has this intercondylar fossa. What bone is? How about the tibia? Not the patella, I'm not going to ask you anything on that one. But in the tibia, intercondylar eminence. You see this rising right here, that increase right there. See that? And it has that medial malleolus. Remember, the medial malleolus is the one that allows you to know if it's left or right, because it's on the midline. It's towards the midline. The lateral malleolus, that's the fibula that goes to the outside, away from the midline. Any questions there? And then we had right here with the tarsal bones. So what's unique about the tarsal bones? How do they resemble carpal bone arrangement? You also have one row of them. Yeah, you have one less, but you also have at least one row of them. The ones that are not in the row are the talus and the calcaneus. As you can see here, you see that? Talus and the calcaneus, but these are in a row. So what's unique about the calcaneus, remember that we basically could see left and right based on the talus shaft or the sustentacular tally. That point right there. Remember, that should be facing the midline. So it should be facing the midpoint area. And the transverse arches, the longitudinal arch, medial or lateral longitudinal arch,